The most consequential US-Iran talks since 1979 just collapsed in a hotel in Islamabad. Within hours, Trump ordered a blockade of the world's most critical oil choke point. What happened inside that hotel in Islamabad, and what happens next, is the story we're breaking down today. Today is April 12, 2026. The Serena Hotel in Islamabad just hosted the most direct US-Iran engagement in nearly half a century. Both sides came with full delegations, 70 Iranian officials, American heavyweights, including JD Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner. This was not a casual meeting. When Vance walked out just after 7 in the morning, he was blunt. Iran had chosen not to accept America's terms. He called it bad news for Iran far more than for America. Then came the phrase that changed the temperature of every capital on earth: final and best offer. Those are not diplomatic words. Those are ultimatum words. Within hours, Trump announced a full naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, effective immediately, 20% of the world's oil supply. One narrow waterway. And now the U.S. Navy has its orders. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, we need to go back to how we got here. 1 year ago, Iran and the United States entered nuclear negotiations following a letter from Trump to Supreme Leader Khamenei. Trump set a 60-day deadline. That deadline passed. Israel attacked Iran, and a 6-week war began that no one was fully prepared for. From the first week of the war, Iran shut down tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. 10 million barrels of oil, per Dalton Y, vanished from global supply. Brent crude jumped double digits almost immediately. 800 commercial vessels were stranded. Nearly 400 tankers stuck. Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and China all worked the phones to broker a pause. A fragile 2-week ceasefire was announced on April 8th. It gave both sides a window, and Islamabad became the site of the most consequential direct talks in decades. But here is what nobody is saying clearly enough. The ceasefire was already fraying before the talks even concluded. Israeli strikes on Lebanon killed hundreds while negotiators were still in the room. The 2-week window was never as stable as it looked on paper. So what actually killed the deal? There were 2 walls, and neither side was willing to climb them. The first was nuclear. The U.S. demanded a hard binding guarantee that Iran would never build a nuclear weapon. Not a framework, not a promise, a guarantee. Iran's position is firm and long-standing. Its enrichment program is for civilian energy. It is a sovereign right. Iran has spent decades saying it does not want a nuclear weapon, while simultaneously enriching uranium to 60% purity and stockpiling enough material that experts estimate could yield 11 nuclear devices. The trust gap is enormous. The second wall was the Strait of Hormuz itself. Iran wanted the right to maintain control and charge transit fees, a tolling system effectively making the waterway an Iranian revenue stream. The U.S. wanted the strait open, unrestricted, for all. These are not positions with a natural midpoint. Iran also had conditions the U.S. never publicly engaged with: the release of $6 billion in frozen assets, the lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions, an end to Israeli strikes on Lebanon. These were described by Iran's own state media as non-negotiable. When you stack non-negotiables against ultimatums, you don't get a deal. You get what happened Sunday morning. Trump's response was swift and dramatic: a full naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, effective immediately. The U.S. Navy ordered to intercept every vessel that had paid Iran's transit toll. Any Iranian who fires at American forces or peaceful vessels will be, in his words, blown to hell. This is a seismic escalation, and it creates a problem nobody seems to be accounting for. The blockade does not only hit Iran, it hits China, India, Pakistan, the very country that just spent weeks trying to broker the peace. These nations have been transiting the strait under arrangements with Tehran, paying the toll to keep energy moving. Trump has now instructed the Navy to interdict their ships too. America is one naval encounter away from a confrontation with a country that is not its enemy. On the economic side, the numbers are not abstract. The strait carries roughly 20% of global oil and gas. Analysts warned from the start of the war that prices could hit $100 a barrel or higher. Saudi Arabia has already restored its east-west pipeline to full capacity to bypass the strait entirely, a signal that Gulf states are preparing for this to last. Iran's response to the blockade was defiant. An Iranian lawmaker who was part of the delegation stated clearly that the strait would not be opened, and that the world would experience a new form of management of that waterway. That is not the language of a side preparing to make concessions. And the mines are still in the water. The U.S. confirmed Iran planted naval mines in the strait, Iran released a map showing 2 safe routes around them, implicitly confirming their existence for the first time. No ship has struck a mine yet, but the danger is real, present, and unresolved. 3 scenarios are now in play. The first is renewed military conflict. The ceasefire has no enforcement mechanism. Iranian officials on the ground said openly, before boarding their flights home, that the chances of renewed aggression are very high. History gives them reason to say so. Both prior conflicts began while negotiations were still active. The second scenario is prolonged economic strangulation. If the strait stays effectively closed through mines, Iranian drone threats, or the blockade itself, the global oil market continues tightening. The supply and demand math is simple and brutal, a 20-25% reduction in global supply against unchanged global demand means prices climb until something breaks. The third scenario is a return to diplomacy, but through different actors. Pakistan's foreign minister confirmed Islamabad will continue its mediating role. China, which has been transiting the strait without incident, has its own strong interest in a resolution. Whether a third-party framework can succeed where direct talks failed is the only remaining diplomatic question. What is clear is this: the 2-week ceasefire is in serious doubt. A semi-official Iranian news agency confirmed there are no current plans for a new round of negotiations. The window that Pakistani diplomacy fought to open is closing, and the world, from Beijing to Brussels to Mumbai, is watching what fills the space that diplomacy just vacated. Here is where we stand. A war that began 6 weeks ago has not ended. The most direct US-Iran talks in half a century have failed. The world's most important oil route is now the site of an American naval blockade. A ceasefire exists on paper and is fraying by the hour. And the fundamental disagreements, nuclear, maritime, sanctions, remain exactly where they were before 21 hours of talks began. The question everyone from Islamabad to Washington to Beijing is asking is exactly this: what happens next? The answer right now is that nobody knows. And in geopolitics, that uncertainty is its own kind of danger. We will keep tracking this story as it develops, because it is not over, and the decisions made in the next 72 hours will shape what comes after. If you want to stay ahead of this story, not tomorrow, not next week, but as it unfolds, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The story doesn't end here, it evolves. And so does our coverage.